Well, I think Dean said that war is usually the extension of geopolitical doctrine.
Yeah.
I would say the geopolitical doctrine serves imperial interests. And the whole idea of geopolitics is how to divide nations against each other, divide nations internally, religious, tribal, various kinds of identity breakups. And geopolitics was essentially a British invention for controlling the empire that they had. And I chose to talk about Africa first because Africa has been a target of predatory imperialist looters from the 15th century to the present. The method of looting has changed and the method of causing the wars has changed, but the intent has remained the same: to extract the maximum amount of wealth from the African continent for the smallest cost. That's the old British concept of buy cheap and sell dear. Now, today what we're dealing with is a situation where the competition over raw materials is higher than ever. And the demand, as you pointed out, Clarice, of the unipolar order for the lion's share of those resources has put it at odds with the growing sovereignty movement of the global south. So I just wanted to give a brief summary of what Africa has faced in terms of geopolitics, because it gives us a very good picture of what this whole fight is about. The question of why Africa has become an increasing target of imperial geopolitics, all you have to do is look at some of the figures. You have almost a quarter of the world's agricultural land located in Africa, 30% or more of known mineral resources, over 10% of oil and natural gas, and by 2030, 42% of the world's youth will be in Africa. Mm-hmm. And when I say that there's looting going on, the looting included for a long time slavery, but it still continues with the cheap labor attempt by the International Monetary World Trade Organization and others to take advantage of African labor. Now, the situation, just to situate it, let me just mention the importance of Cecil Rhodes as part of this imperial geopolitics. Now, he authorized the use of force and violence to sustain control. The Rhodes operation, I just will bring up a funny point to it. Lord Balfour of the Balfour Declaration told the House of Commons that Rhodes' investments in Africa will, in rail and telegraph, perform the basis for the development of Africa. Now, when he said that before the House of Commons, virtually the whole House broke down in laughter because they knew that Rhodes was a thief and a looter, and he had no interest in developing Africa for the people. Mm-hmm. But that represents, in a sense, what we're dealing with when you talk about geopolitics and imperial geopolitics. Mm-hmm. What Rhodes said in terms of the defense of why Britain should have an empire, he said, the British are the greatest people the world has ever seen, but we do not know our strength, our greatness, or our destiny. So this is the idea of being the anointed by the Lord to take over the resources and use them for the benefit of the British people. Now, on geopolitics, we have to start with Mackinder. And he gave the famous speech in 1904 of the geopolitical pivot of history. Now, it's notable that he didn't really include much about Africa in his evaluation of the world's powers, of the world's countries. But he did acknowledge that Africa has a potential power due to its agricultural land, raw materials, and so on. And he said Africa's geography has a potential in shaping future geopolitical matters. Mm-hmm. And so his idea was that while Africa was not an immediate target, it would become a target, largely because it's at the, it intersects both Europe and the Central Asia. Sure. And as a result, can be connected to Eurasia. That was Mackinder's whole idea. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the British saw holding places in Africa as of great value. Of course, so did the French and the Belgians and others. Mm-hmm. Now, then let me just give you a more recent example of this, what Clarice identified correctly as the unipolar order.
Yeah.
And one of those moments was in 1975, when the United States released a document called National Security Study Memo 200, under the auspices of Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Mm-hmm. And what it argued is that there are implications of worldwide population growth for U.S. security and overseas interests. And what did he say in that? The population growth and he identified 13 countries. He said that these are countries that as they grow, their people are going to demand that they have sovereign control over their own resources. And this will threaten the resources needed for the advanced sector. This became the actual doctrine of the United States under the Ford administration. It was a classified document. The African countries that he mentioned were Nigeria, Egypt, and Ethiopia. And additionally, he mentioned Pakistan, Bangladesh, Mexico, and others. And what he argued is that as population growth continues, there's a threat to the availability of the resources needed, especially for the advanced sector countries. And therefore, the West needs to come up with a policy for reducing the population growth in these countries that are growing. Now, what's one of the best ways to do that? War and civil war. Mm-hmm. And so I made the point, I wanted to start this by just saying that when you're looking at the danger of war, you have to look at the intent.
Absolutely.
It's not just that there's animosity between different peoples, different religions, and so on. There is an intent, and the intent of the imperial geopoliticians is to make sure that the resources exist for their cartels. And that's the example of Cecil Rhodes, who had one kind of way of enforcing it back then. Go to the 50s and Brigadier General Frank Kitson and irregular warfare, a slightly different approach. Today, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, they still value the benefits to the cartels over and above the benefits to any nation. And the thing that's changed, and that's especially threatening to them, to the imperialists, is the emergence of leaders in the global south, including in Africa, who are standing up and fighting for the sovereign development of their resources for their own people. And now with the BRICS, they have an opportunity to stand up against the Western or global North imperial powers. Yeah. And so that's what we're looking at when we see geopolitical conflict leading to war today. In my view, there's no interest for any African country to go to war against another African country.
Absolutely.
The problem comes about when you have the West coming in and telling the Africans how you have to develop. And my final point here is that I think Naledi Pandor did a service to all people in the world, not just for Africans, but the whole world. She's a former foreign minister of South Africa. When Secretary of State Tony Blinken came to South Africa and started lecturing her on how South Africa should function in the world, she said, "Excuse me, sir, we're a sovereign nation. Don't come here to lecture us about your democracy." And that's the challenge and the threat to the West. They see China and Russia moving in and helping African countries develop. And I think this is the greatest potential for change, for positive change in the world in probably over 5 centuries.